Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Caitlin and I share everything about books that I love, books that I don't like. I do a lot of book reviews and sometimes I write some poetry, but I haven't done that in a while. So I mainly just do book reviews and then sometimes I'll have fun and do 1-star review reads of my 5-star reads. Today, I want to talk about The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. This was written in 1959, written and published. Netflix created its own show, and it's quite different from the book. The characters are different, and the plot's a little different. I also have seen the movie The Haunting. I have it on VHS, actually, and that is more accurate to the book than I think the TV show is, but they're both still really good and I highly recommend. But if you haven't read the book, you should read it. I did rate this 3 stars out of 5, and the whole reasoning for that was because I personally disliked the ending. I thought that there should have been more of a falling action after the climax and more of a resolution. But to me, there really wasn't one. And I'm always someone that's like, I need more detail, like explain more of what's going on. And she was obviously done with writing the book. So let's get into the setting. So we've got an isolated mansion that is supposedly haunted in the middle of nowhere, unspecified location surrounded by hills and trees. We have 5 main characters. Well, 5 characters that add the most to the story. Our main character is Eleanor. Eleanor is, she's kind of like a kid that hasn't grown up yet, but she's like 34. And she's the main character, so we follow her inner dialogue throughout the whole book. And it wasn't my favorite. I thought it was a really interesting main character perspective. Needless to say, it makes sense, I guess. And then we have Theodora. Theodora is Dr. Montague's assistant. Dr. Montague is an occult scholar, and he's the whole reason why everybody ends up at Hill House. And then we have Luke. Luke is the heir to Hill House. He's supposed to inherit it. And then we have Mrs. Dudley. Mrs. Dudley is the caretaker who only shows up when she needs to make breakfast, and she leaves at 5 or 6 when the sun goes down because she refuses to stay at Hill House when it's dark. Then we have Mrs. Montague, who is Dr. Montague's wife, and she is also very into the occult. She communicates with the dead, and I think she sympathizes with the ghosts or the entities, whatever you want to call them. And then we have Arthur, and Arthur is Mrs. Montague's assistant. I just want to get this out there in the open. Mrs. Montague was my favorite character. I thought she was funny. I thought she was bold. I thought she was very independent. She knew who she was. She knew why she was there. She knew what she was going to do. And the rest of the characters are kind of clueless. They don't really know what's going on. Dr. Montague is just trying to prove that his research is true. He wants to show that there really is a supernatural aspect to everybody's physical lives. And Theodora, she's definitely very skeptical. She doesn't really believe that anything could happen that's not, in the 3-dimensional world. And she has some sort of scientific explanation for everything that goes on in the house. Or she tries to place the blame on other people. Luke seems to be incredibly careless, and it's not like he really cares what's going on. He's clueless. He's very, he kind of latches on to Theodora, and then, they kind of pair off and go do their own thing for a while. So as far as the characters are concerned, that's done. Then there's the conflicts that I identified throughout the story. I believe there's 4. I think there's the man versus self, man versus the paranormal, man versus man, and man versus fear. And the reason why I put fear in there is because there's a whole scene where everyone's begging Dr. Montague to tell them why they're there, what the purpose of them being there is. And he tells them, he's like, if I were to tell you, you wouldn't even be able to leave anyway. So do you really want to know? If you tried to leave, you'd end up like this last guy that tried to leave 18 years ago, and he ended up, his horse threw him into a tree. So he ended up dead, So I think there's a lot of fear factor in the book. I think Shirley Jackson sets it up that way. And I've got questions about it, and I'll get to that at the end of the review. So we'll get into the plot. There's going to be spoilers. If you don't like spoilers, can fast forward. So we've got Dr. Montague, the occult scholar, and he runs Hill House because he's got all this research of psychic phenomena, and he wants to prove that the supernatural does exist. So he invites Eleanor, Theodora, and Luke based on their personal similarities. Eleanor is very isolated. She's kind of oppressed by her brother and sister. She ends up being oppressed by everybody else in the end of the book. She doesn't quite know who she is as an individual. She hasn't really grown up yet. She hasn't really figured out who she is. Theodora is Dr. Montague's assistant, so he brings her along. And then we've got Luke, who is supposed to inherit the house, and I don't think he really wants to. So they all have a meeting at the beginning of the story, and they're asking him, what's going on here? Why do you have us here? What's our purpose of being here? And he's like, I don't really know what happens here, but I'm here to prove my research. And they're like, okay, well, what research do you do? Dr. Montague tells them, I believe in the supernatural. I believe that paranormal things happen. I do believe that this house is haunted, but I want to experience it firsthand. And you guys are here to help me with my research. And the first night, a haunting happens. There's a entity that walks through the hallway that they're sleeping on. It's on the second floor. And there's banging on the door, and they think that it's someone else doing it, and they don't quite know what's going on. And Eleanor and Theodore are freaked out. They're wigging out. They're like, Dr. Montague, Luke, what are y'all doing banging on the door? Someone's screaming out there. What are you guys doing? Is this a prank? And they're like, no, we were sleeping. We didn't even hear anything. So immediately, there's stuff happening to Eleanor, which is kind of an important element for the rest of the book. And of course, Eleanor, Theodora, and Luke are all trying to prove that this is the house settling in, or it's an old house, like maybe weird things happen, we don't really know, maybe it was some type of there's got to be a scientific explanation versus this being some supernatural experience, right? Because they don't believe the ghosts exist. So as the storyline goes on, Eleanor is more and more disconnected from the group. She is made fun of, she's mocked by Theodora, who she thought was her friend, and then people start blaming her on the hauntings that are happening, which is interesting because she does experience sleepwalking. So it's I've got questions about it. It's kind of hard to tell. I got confused a little bit. I was like, so is this actually like, what's going on here, She begins to have mental breaks, and she sleepwalks. Again, I already mentioned that. And she becomes more connected with the house or whatever is inside the house. At the height of the haunting, which is near the very end of the book, she is sleepwalking and she's doing her little nightly haunting thing. And she kind of slips into this childish state of mind. Now, in the beginning, Dr. Montague explains that there was a family that lived in Hill House, and one of the sisters is supposedly still residing there today today as a ghost, right? She's supposed to be haunting the house. So Eleanor has all of these moments where she's talking to a spirit, and the spirit tells her to stay here and she needs a friend, or like she doesn't want to be alone anymore. And Eleanor has a very weak state of mind. She's already very unaware or unsure of who she wants to be. And because of that, I think either her fear provokes her to do whatever she does at the end, or the other realm latches onto that because she's not of sound mind, right? So then after this whole thing happens where she's basically haunting the house herself, and you kind of are wondering, is she possessed? Did she go insane? Did she finally have a mental break to where she lost it and she's now one with the house? I think it's kind of up for interpretation. So Dr. Montague decides that she needs to go home. He's like, girl, you gotta get out of here. There is no reason for you to be here. The house has decided it wants you, so you need to be the one to leave. And she doesn't want to. She wants to stay. She feels at home at Hill House, and she doesn't feel alone in the mansion. Eleanor also forms an unnatural codependency to Theodora, and Theodora is very independent. She's like, I don't need nobody. Please don't get attached to me. And Eleanor is like, no, we're going to be best friends forever. And she's just very, like, it's like watching an 8-year-old never grow up. And so as soon as she gets into her car, because she feels forced to leave, and she's very easily influenced by outside perspective and outside pressure, she decides to, if that makes sense, she runs her car into a tree because she decides that that's the one thing they can't stop her from doing. Because they wake her up during her sleepwalking, they tell her she has to leave, she doesn't want to, they force her to leave, they stop her from staying in the house, and she kind of has to be coddled and taken care of the whole time, if that makes any sense. So my personal thoughts, I was very disappointed by the ending. I really thought that there would be more to the story. I expected there to be a little bit more to the falling action of the story right after the climax, but it's like the climax hits, Eleanor's either possessed or insane, and then it was kind of like, wow, that's it. I really was hoping there'd be more. I did think that the main character perspective was very interesting. Her inner dialogue, you kind of start to feel insane with her. It's kind of odd. Maybe that's just me, but I also kind of dive right into the books that I'm reading. And I also thought it was thought-provoking, so this will go into my question segment. My first question upon reading this book was, do our subconscious thoughts really manifest our reality? I don't know if you guys have ever seen those reels on Instagram or anything on TikTok where people are like, yeah, however you think subconsciously is going to become a part of your physical day-to-day life. So if you're super negative all the time and you hate yourself and you hate your life and you hate people, that's going to manifest into whatever you're doing, right? So you wake up, you're in a bad mood. Are you going to change that, or are you going to just let that happen the rest of the day? Are you going to be mean to people because you're in a bad mindset? Are you going to treat others differently because you're in a weird headspace? Are you going to isolate yourself and then blame other people for that because you have no self-responsibility? Kind of stuff like that. And then I also kind of think this goes into the fear factor of the book, because everyone's begging Dr. Montague to tell them what happens. And this is what he says. This is in page 71 of my version of the book. I know each copy is going to be a little different, but this is the Penguin Classics version. Got it at Barnes & Noble for $9. Cheapest book I got there. So it says, the doctor sighed again. Suppose, he said slowly, you heard the story of Hill House and decided not to stay. How would you leave tonight? He looked around at them quickly. The gates are locked. Hill House has a reputation for insistent hospitality. It seemingly dislikes letting its guests get away. The last person who tried to leave Hill House in darkness, it was 18 years ago, I grant you, was killed at the turn in the driveway, where his horse bolted and crushed him against the big tree. Suppose I tell you about Hill House and one of you wants to leave. Tomorrow at least we could see that you got safely to the village. And then they convince him to tell them about Hill House, because they already believe that it's a ghost story. So I think there's already that subconscious state of mind. Their subconscious is acting more than their conscience is. And they're thinking, this house really must be haunted. And if it's kind of one of those things where it's like, if you believe it, it must be so. And I think that that's kind of a huge psychological part of the book, which I could do an entire thesis about. I don't really want to, but I could. So that question was, how does fear cause us to act? So if you're fearful of something, like, I guess the only thing I can think of is in this day and age, like walking alone as a woman. If you're afraid of that, are you going to stay inside? Or if you're afraid, are you going to tackle that fear and go for a walk or go for a run or do something on your own? Like going to the grocery store. It's a scary world out there. But are you going to be so afraid that it hinders you from living your life? Kind of like how they were so afraid of something happening that things did start to happen in the book. I don't know. Tell me what you think. So some other questions I had, and this kind of goes along with how Dr. Montague starts off telling them the background of the story. So when he gave the others a history of Hill House and its inhabitability and rumors did that skew their perspectives? Did that cause them to act differently? Did that cause them to hear every little bump in the house and assume that there was a ghostie? Had they known nothing and had zero expectations, would that have changed their experience? Just food for thought, you know? And then at the end of chapter 9, it was really hard for me to believe that the house was actually haunted, because I personally believe that Eleanor had a mental break. I could be wrong, though. So my questions on that were, was the house really haunted? Was Eleanor's fear of being alone manifest physically so that she would be? Was it truly supernatural, or was Eleanor possessed? Did she go insane? And why didn't the others end up like Eleanor? If it truly was haunted, wouldn't it have affected everybody else residing in the house for a week, even though it's supposed to be like 3 months? Those are my questions, and that's why I think that the book is so thought-provoking, because it causes you to question what the true intention of the story was. And the last question, and one more personal thought, was that I wished that the characters were stronger. I wished Eleanor had been more confident and psychologically sound. And I do wish that the other characters could have been more caring and selfless towards her and a bit more rational. But how different would the story have been if all of that were true? If Shirley Jackson had wrote this from a different perspective, how different would the story be? So, those are my thoughts and opinions and questions. And finally, I've got my favorite quotes and scenes from the book, from beginning to end. So this is from Dr. Montague. There are popular theories, however, which discount the eerie, the mysterious. There are people who will tell you that the disturbances I am calling psychic are actually the result of subterranean waters. Atmospheric pressure, sunspots, earth tremors, all have their advocates among the skeptical. And then he goes on to say, people are always so anxious to get things out into the open where they can put a name to them, so long as it has something of a scientific ring. And then later on, this was a scene with all of them, so Eleanor, Theodora, Luke, and Dr. Montague. And this is from Theodora. Then everything is a little bit off-center. That's why it feels so disjointed. Then Eleanor asks, what happens when you go back to a real house? And Luke says, it must be like coming off shipboard. And Dr. Montague responds, it must affect people in some way. We have grown to trust blindly in our senses of balance and reason, and I can see where the mind might fight wildly to preserve its own familiar stable patterns against all evidence that it was leaning sideways. And then this is Eleanor telling Theodora, nothing in the house moves until you look away, and then you just catch something from the corner of your eye. Spooky. And then this is Dr. Montague and Luke talking. I think we are only afraid of ourselves. No, of seeing ourselves clearly and without disguise. I really liked that one. That was probably one of my favorite quotes out of the whole book. I think that can be applied to today, especially with social media. Everybody's trying to put up a front and share all the best parts of their lives, and people aren't really real, People are disguised. They like to disguise themselves and their feelings. And then this is a scene where Eleanor and Theodora are walking outside, and it says, afraid to stop, they moved on slowly, close together, and ahead of them the path widened and blackened and curved. On either side of them, the trees, silent, relinquished the dark color they had held, paled, grew transparent, and stood white and ghastly against the black sky. I just really liked the vision in that one. I really liked the details that Jackson had shared about the wilderness that surrounds Hill House. And then Mrs. Montague shows up, and she's got the funniest stuff to say. And she's very real. She's very rational. And she's probably the strongest character in the book, because even Dr. Montague kind of starts to question his own research, and he's like, dude, maybe I was wrong, And Mrs. Montague shows up, and she quickly puts him in his place. She says, I must say, John, I never expected to find you all so nervous. I deplore fear in these matters, because he starts to get scared. She's like, well, you can't be afraid. What are you doing? And then following that, she says, the spirits dwelling in this house may be actually suffering, because they're aware that you're afraid of them. And I was like, girl, you are so real. Love that you're keeping it a buck with everybody. So, and then this other scene. All right, so like I said, Mrs. Montague communicates with the dead. So this is kind of what she's talking about. She says, Planchette has been very kind tonight, Mrs. Montague said. John, there are definitely foreign elements present in this house. Quite a splendid sitting, really, Arthur said. He waved a sheaf of paper triumphantly. We've got a good deal of information for you, Mrs. Montague said. Now, Planchette was quite insistent about a nun. Have you learned anything about a nun, John? In Hill House? Not likely. Planchette felt very strongly about a nun, John. Perhaps something of the sort. A dark, vague figure, even. Has been seen in the neighborhood? Villagers terrified when staggering home late at night? The figure of a nun is a fairly common. John, if you please, I assume you are suggesting that I am mistaken. Or perhaps it is your intention to point out that Planchette may be mistaken. I assure you, and you must believe Planchette even if my word is not good enough for you, that a nun was most specifically suggested. I am only trying to say, my dear, that the wraith of a nun is far and away the most common form of appearance. There has never been such a thing connected with Hill House, but in almost every John, if you please. I assume I may continue, or is Planchette to be dismissed without a hearing? Thank you. Mrs. Montague composed herself. Now then, there is also a name spelled variously as Helen, or Helene, or Elena. Who might that be? My dear, many people have lived. Helen brought us a warning against a mysterious monk. Now, when a monk and a nun both turn up in one house, expect the place was built on an older site, Arthur said. Influences prevailing, you know. Older influences hanging around, he explained more fully. It sounds very much like broken vows, does it not? Very much. Had a lot of that back then, you know. Temptation, probably. I hardly think, the doctor began. I dare say. She was walled up alive, Mrs. Montague said. The nun, I mean. They always did that, you know. You've no idea the messages I've gotten from nuns walled up alive. There is no case on record of any nun ever being. John, may I point out to you once more that I myself have had messages from nuns walled up alive? Do you think I'm telling you a fib, John? Or do you suppose that a nun would deliberately pretend to have been walled up alive when she was not? Is it possible that I am mistaken once more, John? Certainly not, my dear, Dr. Montague sighed wearily. With one candle and a crust of bread, Arthur told Theodora. Horrible thing to do when you think about it. No nun was ever walled up alive, the doctor said sullenly. He raised his voice slightly. It is a legend, a story, a libel circulated. All right, John, we won't quarrel over it. You may believe whatever you choose. Just understand, however, that sometimes purely materialistic views must give way before facts. Now, it is a proven fact that among the visitations troubling this house are a nun and a— What else is there? Luke asked hastily. I'm so interested in hearing what Planchette had to say. Mrs. Montague waggled a finger roguishly. Nothing about you, young man, although one of the ladies present may hear something of interest. Impossible woman, Eleanor thought. Impossible, vulgar, possessive woman. Now, Helen, Mrs. Montague went on, wants us to search the cellar for an old well. Don't tell me Helen was buried alive, the doctor said. I hardly think so, John. I am sure that she would have mentioned it. As a matter of fact, Helen was most unclear about just what we were to find in the well. I doubt, however, that it will be treasure. One so rarely meets with real treasure in a case of this kind. More likely, evidence of the missing nun. More like 80 years of rubbish. John, I cannot understand the skepticism in you of all people. After all, you did come to this house to collect evidence of supernatural activity, and now, when I bring you a full account of the causes and an indication of where to start looking, you are positively scornful. She keeps it a buck. That's all I gotta say. And then, my last favorite scene is chapter 9. The whole thing. Shirley Jackson writes, either a mental break or possession very, very well, I think. And it was exciting to read. It honestly did creep me out quite a bit. I was like, this is getting a little weird, a little scary. But still, I think it might have deserved more than 3 stars from me. Now that I'm talking about it and after I wrote my book review, I think it could be a 4 out of 5 stars. I really just wish the ending had been further detailed. You know, I could have read at least 100 more pages of what happens after the real haunting, you know? So, those are my opinions and thoughts on The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. And if you haven't read it, I would read it. If you like horror and it's got some gothic elements to it, because it's an old mansion, you might like it. And if you have read it and you liked it either more than I did or less than I did, let me know in the comments below and share your rating of the book. And I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Hope you have a good one.